Welcome to Stories of History. I'm Virgil, your guide, and today we're diving deep into a pivotal moment that reshaped a nation, the devastating Lisbon earthquake of 1755. You might think, okay, an earthquake, a terrible tragedy, but this one did so much more. It shook the very foundations of faith, governance, and even architecture. So get ready to journey back to 18th century Portugal, where the ground trembled, the sea roared, and the course of history was forever altered. Picture this. It's All Saints' Day, November 1st, 1755, a crisp autumn morning in Lisbon. The city is alive, bustling with religious fervor as people flock to churches offering prayers for their departed loved ones. They're completely unaware of the cataclysm that's about to unfold. At precisely 9:30 a.m., the earth begins to heave and shudder. It's not just a tremor, it's a full-blown earthquake, a monstrous force ripping through the city. Buildings crumble, churches, packed with worshippers, collapse inwards, and those unlucky enough to be in the open are bombarded by falling debris. The air fills with the screams of the injured, the dust of shattered stone, and the terror of a city in the throes of a natural disaster. But the horror doesn't end there. Fires fueled by overturned candles and braziers erupt across the devastated city. People desperate to escape the inferno flee towards the seemingly safe haven of the coast. The open shoreline, free from collapsing buildings and raging fires, appears to offer a moment of respite. They think they've escaped the worst of it, but they're wrong. Just when they thought they were safe, the sea recedes, drawing back in an ominous silence. Then a monstrous wave, a tsunami towering some 65 feet high, comes crashing down, surging 8 miles inland. It obliterates everything in its path, swallowing up those who had just moments ago escaped the earthquake and fires. The devastation is almost unimaginable. Tens of thousands perished in Lisbon alone, with the death toll extending across Portugal, Spain, and even Morocco. The tsunami's wrath reached as far as Finland and across the Atlantic to Martinique and Barbados. Even in Madrid, 2 children are killed by a falling cross from a church, highlighting the far-reaching impact of this event. Now, in the face of this unimaginable tragedy, the church's immediate response was to declare it God's wrath, divine retribution for the sins of the people. It's a pretty understandable reaction, right? When something this catastrophic happens, people search for explanations for meaning. But not everyone bought into this narrative. This was a time when Enlightenment thought was beginning to challenge traditional religious explanations. Thinkers like Voltaire, Rousseau, and Kant saw the Lisbon earthquake as a tragic but natural event, something to be understood and learned from, rather than attributed to an angry deity. So you have these 2 very different ways of interpreting the earthquake, one rooted in religious doctrine, the other in emerging scientific thought. And this clash of perspectives would have a profound impact on how the disaster was dealt with and ultimately on the future of Portugal itself. While the church was grappling with the theological implications of the earthquake, a very different kind of leader stepped onto the scene. His name was Sebastián José de Carvalho y Melo, later known as the Marquis of Pombal, the powerful prime minister to King José VII. Now, the king, understandably shaken by the experience, retreated with his family to a camp outside the devastated city, leaving Pombal with the daunting task of dealing with the aftermath. Pombal was faced with a city in ruins, a population in shock, and a deeply unsettling question hanging in the air. How do you rebuild not just a city, but a nation's spirit after a catastrophe of this magnitude? His response was a fascinating mix of pragmatism and, let's be honest, a bit of ruthlessness. Pombal's first priority was dealing with the immediate crisis. He orchestrated firefighting efforts, organized the burial of the dead to prevent epidemics, and ensured survivors were fed. But the sheer number of casualties made burying everyone impossible, leading to the grim necessity of disposing of bodies at sea. This decision, while drastic, underscored the sheer scale of the tragedy. Next, Pombal focused on maintaining order. He deployed troops to surround Lisbon, preventing people from fleeing and essentially forcing them to participate in the rebuilding efforts. Gallows were erected as a stark reminder to anyone contemplating looting or shirking their duty. Pombal understood that rebuilding a city required not just resources, but discipline and a sense of collective purpose. This approach, though harsh, prevented the chaos that often follows such disasters and set the stage for a remarkably swift recovery. But Pombal wasn't just about brute force. He was a man of reason and foresight, and he saw the rebuilding of Lisbon as an opportunity not just to restore what was lost, but to create something new, something better. Even as the rubble was being cleared, Pombal assembled a team of architects and engineers to design a new Lisbon one that would be resistant to future earthquakes. They experimented with innovative construction techniques, using reinforced foundations and flexible structures intended to absorb the shocks of earthquakes rather than crumble under them. They even used soldiers to test the resilience of building models by marching and stomping around them, a rudimentary but effective form of seismic testing that demonstrated Pombal's commitment to a data-driven approach to reconstruction. This wasn't just about bricks and mortar. It was about laying the foundation for a more modern, more resilient Portugal. Pombal's vision extended beyond just the physical rebuilding of the city. He sought to reshape the very fabric of Portuguese society, starting with its relationship with the church. The earthquake had leveled entire neighborhoods, reducing everything from grand palaces to humble homes to piles of rubble. It was a blank slate, a terrifying one, but also an opportunity for a complete urban overhaul. And Pombal, being Pombal, wasn't about to let this chance slip away. He wasn't interested in simply recreating the labyrinthine medieval streets that had characterized pre-earthquake Lisbon. He envisioned a city designed for efficiency, commerce, and importantly, resistance to future earthquakes. To achieve this vision, he brought in the best architects and engineers of the time, and they came up with some truly innovative ideas. We're talking about wide, straight avenues to improve traffic flow and allow for quicker evacuation in case of another disaster. Buildings were designed with reinforced foundations and flexible structures intended to absorb the shocks of earthquakes rather than crumble under them. They even experimented with what we might call prefabricated construction, creating standardized building components that could be mass-produced and quickly assembled. This was revolutionary at the time, allowing for much faster reconstruction. What emerged from the rubble was a new Lisbon, a city unlike any other in Europe. It was a city that in many ways reflected Pombal's personality. Orderly, rational, and forward-looking, the old Lisbon, with its narrow, winding alleys and haphazardly constructed buildings, was gone, replaced by a grid-like system of streets and sturdy earthquake-resistant structures. This new city, with its emphasis on practicality and resilience, became a model for urban planning in other earthquake-prone areas. Pombal's approach to reconstruction, his focus on scientific principles and innovative engineering, influenced architects and city planners for generations to come. But this dramatic transformation wasn't without its critics. Some lamented the loss of the old city's charm and character, the intimate feel of its narrow streets and traditional architecture. They saw Pombal's grand vision as cold and impersonal, a betrayal of Lisbon's unique identity. And there's no denying that the rebuilding process was disruptive, and for many traumatic people were forced to relocate, businesses were uprooted, and the pace of change was relentless. It's easy to imagine the mix of awe and anxiety that must have filled the hearts of those who witnessed Lisbon's rebirth. But Pombal pressed on, driven by his belief that he was creating a city worthy of a new, more enlightened Portugal, and in many ways he succeeded. The rebuilt Lisbon became a symbol of Portuguese resilience, a testament to the power of human ingenuity to overcome even the most devastating disasters. It was a city reborn from the ashes, a beacon of progress in an age of upheaval. But even as Lisbon rose from the ruins, the earthquake continued to cast a long shadow over Portuguese society. The trauma of that day, the loss of life, the destruction of cherished landmarks, all of it left an indelible mark on the collective psyche. And the questions raised by the earthquake, the questions about God, fate, and the fragility of human existence continued to resonate. These were questions that wouldn't be easily answered, questions that would fuel philosophical and theological debates for decades to come. But while the earthquake shook the faith of many, it also presented an opportunity for Pombal to further his own agenda, an agenda that involved diminishing the power of the church and consolidating his control over Portuguese society. And at the heart of this conflict was a Jesuit priest named Gabriel Malagrida. Now, Malagrida wasn't just any priest. He was the king's confessor, a man of considerable influence in the Portuguese court, and he was absolutely convinced that the earthquake was divine retribution, even writing a book about it titled Judgment of the True Cause of the Earthquake. In it, he doubled down on the divine wrath narrative and vehemently opposed any attempts to explain the earthquake through natural causes. Malagrida saw any effort to rebuild or find practical solutions as an affront to God, a defiance of divine will. You can imagine how well this sat with Pombal, who was busy trying to drag Lisbon into a more enlightened age. He saw Malagrida's pronouncements as not only absurd, but dangerous. They undermined his efforts to restore order, sowed fear and superstition among the people, and most importantly, strengthened the grip of the church on Portuguese society. This was a power struggle, and Pombal was determined to win. Adding fuel to the fire, Malagrida's book caught the attention of a prominent figure outside of Portugal. The Enlightenment writer, Voltaire, already a critic of religious dogma, was appalled by the church's response to the earthquake, particularly the calls for autos de fe, basically public trials and punishments of heresy to appease God. He satirized this in his novel Candide, including a fictional scene where an auto de fe is held in Lisbon after the earthquake, with people being burned at the stake to prevent further tremors. It was a scathing critique of the Church's dogma and its tendency to resort to superstition and cruelty in the face of natural phenomena. This episode, involving Malagrida and Voltaire, perfectly encapsulates the clash of ideology that was playing out in the wake of the earthquake. On one side, you had the Church clinging to traditional explanations, attributing the disaster to divine wrath, and advocating for religious rituals to appease God. On the other side, you had the growing force of the Enlightenment, embracing reason and scientific inquiry and challenging the authority of the Church. And caught in the middle of this ideological tug-of-war was Pombal, a man who, while not necessarily a die-hard Enlightenment thinker himself, recognized the opportunity to use this moment to further his own ambitions and reshape Portugal according to his vision. He saw in the earthquake a chance to break the Church's hold on power and establish a more secular state, and he found his opportunity in the most dramatic way imaginable. A failed assassination attempt on the king. He saw the earthquake as an opportunity to break with the past, to weaken the grip of the Church, and to build a new Portugal based on Enlightenment principles. His actions, while often ruthless and self-serving, ultimately contributed to the secularization of Portuguese society and the modernization of its institutions. He established Europe's first secular education system, promoted scientific inquiry, and fostered a spirit of innovation. The Lisbon earthquake, then, was more than just a natural disaster. It was a turning point in history, a moment that shook the foundations of European thought and triggered a cascade of changes that would shape the course of Western civilization. It's a reminder that even the most devastating events can have unintended consequences, that destruction can sometimes lead to creation, and that the human capacity for resilience, innovation, and the pursuit of knowledge can ultimately prevail even in the face of unimaginable tragedy. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time. I'm Virgil, and I'll see you next time on Stories of History.